You're listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative. Today we're joined by Vass, Bednar, and Kaylie Tiessen. Vass serves as Managing Director, and Kaylie serves as Chief Economist at the newly founded Canadian Shield Institute, a public policy organization focused on Canadian sovereignty. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so you two are part of a really cool new organization. It's a nonprofit, I want to say think tank. I don't know if you enjoy that word as well, but it's called the Canadian Shield Institute. And you do a lot of thought leadership on topics like national security, industrial strategy, innovation, institutional renewal. Really, really important stuff, particularly at this time in Canadian history. Can you talk a little bit about how the organization was founded and what kind of work you do?
Sure. I mean, we're about like 3.5 months old, I would say, in Vass time. So the Institute was announced back in January of 2025 through a very generous and historic gift from Jim Balsillie. And, I don't mean to suggest that I speak for Jim by any means. Jim speaks for himself. But, at that time, President Trump, right, had just been elected. We were in that noise, the early noise of the tariffs and the uncertainty. And Jim saw an opportunity in our thinking space to build capacity for Canada and build a vehicle that was decidedly domestic and relentlessly focused on how we both rebuild and restore economic sovereignty through systems and institutions, but also start to infuse more of a lens of economic sovereignty into the decisions that we're making in the future, right? Every single policy decision is an opportunity to consider our economic sovereignty and how we're creating and distributing economic value. So that's the kind of legacy and history of SHIELD. It is not an allusion to Agents of SHIELD or the Marvel Universe, things people always bring up to us. Actually an acronym: Securing Homegrown Innovation, Economic Leadership, and Defense, but of course meant to evoke the incredible rock formation, going back to geologics, the rock formation that underpins so much of Canada. And thank you for saying that we're, contributing thought leadership. We're popping up, right? We're picking our battles, trying to be really constructive in this moment and really trying to balance. You asked us, like, do we like the think tank? You could dress it up, policy studio. We think of ourselves as, policy designers. We're trying to be,
that, yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like, is it just nomenclature, but constructive, right? Credible, and like Canadian through and through. So it's nice to get to chat with you about it, but that's kind of our history. We're here not because we want to be, because we need to be, right? We've lost so much capacity in Canada. We've given it away. And, what we're excited about is bringing a kind of hopeful, joyful tone. And one of the really small things we're doing is just sharing snack-sized sovereignty stories, right? This is a sexy kind of hot word that is also dangerously vague, and we can make it make sense, right? It's part of our everyday lives. And that's just something really tiny that we do, in our spare time, in our newsletter, The National Interest. But I'm rambling. I mean, I feel really lucky to get to work with Kaylie, our chief economist, who started with us late August. And, back to the 3.5 months, like when you're building a team to do dedicated work, people are, transitioning from past jobs, and it's the summer. So, whatever that Avengers line is, or whoever, when people are like, I'm building a team, a lot of the time when people are like, Vass, What are you doing? I'm like, I'm researching and I'm building a team.
Also looking to help explain Canada and help folks sort of see what's going on in the economy right now through their own sort of lens and their own life experience. So looking at different charts or graphs or data coming out of Statistics Canada, GDP's dropping. Where? Who's losing jobs? We know that jobs are lost. Who's losing them? Where are they being lost? There's lots of data out there. I'm posting on LinkedIn and preparing some other reports and information that'll be coming out in the next little while to help just folks understand and learn how to think about things and what's happening right now. We hear lots of bits and bytes in the news all the time, but what does it mean for you in your life right now?
Or what we see in the research, right? People tune it out, young people especially, right? You feel that talking about economics like isn't for you, or it's like an impenetrable conversation. And yeah, as Kaylie said, we feel if you want to be part of making the country better, let's make sure that we're setting a really strong baseline and being really honest about how the economy is working right now and like what Canada means and what we can do differently.
I wanted to ask a little bit about that, Kaylie, because like, what does that look like day to day in your work? I think that's a really specific job that, perhaps people don't have a lot of insight into what that looks like day to day, but it's really important for contextualizing the times we're in.
Yeah, well, there's two things that go on kind of simultaneously, or like you spend half of the day doing one and half the other. Data, digging in, Statistics Canada, OECD, all sorts of other, earnings calls, all sorts of things where you can gather data from what's happening in the economy and make a nice chart. But how many people know how to read the chart or care what the
Not
chart
me.
says?
I care, but I'm always like, so what does it mean?
And so the other piece of it is talking to folks like, is this data actually like resonating with you and what's happening in your life? I recently posted this chart that showed young workers are working, their hourly wage after adjusting for inflation is less than it was last year. Ooh. And they're working less hours, right? Brutal. And so those two things together mean their income, their purchasing power is quite a bit less than it was last year. And what I've heard from some folks who have recently graduated, as well as their parents, is they were kind of like, finally, it's showing in the data, like this is something we've been experiencing for 6 months. And so making sure we're analyzing the data and finding out whether or not it's actually resonating with people so we can connect those two things together instead of economics just being this, thing that happens, in some elite institution somewhere and it doesn't actually connect to real people's lives. I think that's something that's been missed in the last, 60, 80 years.
I think that's really interesting because when you are thinking about economic data, like there is, anecdote is not data, but there is the anecdotal experience that people have in the economy that, very much to your point, predates when that data comes out and you're analyzing it very much after the fact. And, like I didn't send you guys a question about narrative economics, but it's something I'm really interested in as a communications person. And are you seeing the data and the experiences starting to catch up a little bit? Are we starting to tell that story better about what people are experiencing, or maybe not?
I mean, Kaylie can speak to the data element because she's grinding through for us as our chief economist. Kaylie also gets curveballs throughout the day from me being like, ooh, this report looks so cool. How would we do it for Canada? Hey, everyone, look at this. Oh, I think we could do it this way. Who knows? Emoji running away. Not that I run away from Slack. On the storytelling, something we're also trying to really do is practice policy listening, right? So we're not scrolling through social media all day, but understand kind of how are people articulating how they're experiencing the economy? What are they noticing? And that can be sparking a conversation from something on Reddit or something viral on TikTok or, something on Blue Sky. There was one fascinating thread on Blue Sky. The person's name, we've ended up conversing a little bit, but their handle is like cannelloni or catelli or something like this, a spaghetti reference. So it's just like, who is this person? Turns out they work in IT for a major company. And what they've helped us understand is what is it like for a firm to comply with new tariff obligations? I had no appreciation of this from reading the news. It was all price focused, but it was like, wait a minute. You now need the systems to show the origin of all sorts of metals from your company. There aren't standards around this. The administrative burden, the cost of compliance with the trade war, and when things are kind of moving so quickly, we didn't have an appreciation of. So it is something, actually, it's not something we published, but it is something, or published yet, right? That we kind of took that opportunity to spend a tiny bit of time, dive into and appreciate and kind of build that connection, because that's something we can bring to tables with decision makers, to panels, when we're kind of adding color and sort of saying, like, what does a trade war mean and feel like, not just for citizens as consumers, but for businesses? And then how do we design kind of supportive public policy, and why do you really, like, you need it, right? Anyway, I really appreciate elements like that. And then we're always trying to sort of in our little newsletter project, The National Interest, trying to really anchor in like what are people seeing in the headlines or in their everyday lives, and how is that an invitation into actually a brief but bigger sovereignty story. But sorry, Kaylie, I data, how, the data lags drives you nuts or what?
The data lags, but also what you're talking about now is like beyond anything that would show up in the data, right? So some of economics is like, oh, let's look at the numbers. And then some of it is thinking about exactly what we've just heard is like the friction that gets introduced by a policy. It's not even a policy that Canada imposed. That's a policy that's imposed by the United States, and it's causing tremendous friction for business owners. And that too then takes away from the other investments they may have made, the job creation, the, innovation that could have happened, because we're focused so much on figuring out this friction that's been added. And it's not monetary, but it shows up later on in the statistics.
I want to talk about the idea of sovereignty a little bit, because it's this big fancy word that we throw around, but we don't really define all that often in our politics. So I'm thinking of, as a history nerd, as a political history nerd specifically, we've had a number of elections around this idea of economic sovereignty. So you had, the 1891 election with a national policy. You had the 1911 election as well with Bourton and Laurier, which, unseated a prime minister. We had the 1988 free trade election, and we've just had this recent one as well. And I think the question of Canada's economic sovereignty has probably, the definition of it has probably changed over, those 150 years or so. How would you define it in today's context?
You can think of it as the ability to control your own destiny. So often that's a form of ownership, but like the ability to govern, right? The ability to govern the systems and processes that you have. And you're absolutely right. Throughout history, we've had different kind of more pronounced moments of sovereignty. But right now, as we look ahead to renegotiating trade, as you know, spent years working on market regulation and competition policy and storytelling, and I fail to fully appreciate how much there is in trade law that dictates the terms, not of trade, but of competition writ large. And, now I find myself completely fascinated and freaked out by the digital chapter in CUSMA. So I'm straying from your original question, but it's the ability to do so, right? It doesn't need to mean that everything is public infrastructure, that the government owns, but we're starting to have these like bigger conversations around what are the infrastructures we want and need, and where and what kind of control do we need, and why. And that's the way I would, but I don't know. Is that resonating for you, Kaylie? I should have a perfect catchphrase ready at any time, I suppose.
Oh, it's so resonating. And then also thinking about kind of using our decision making then to create value for Canadians. So how are we going to refocus, the money that we're spending, the investments that we're making, the laws that we're creating or changing, the regulations, in order to deliver more value add to Canada? And one thing that I've done over the last 4 weeks in this role is think about all of the different ways that we could be creating value in Canada instead of sort of letting it being siphoned off by someone else. Thinking about creating jobs instead of offshoring them, or thinking about AI taking them, and maybe we should have people working instead of AI kind of doing work for us. When we invest in research and development at public institutions and universities, are we making sure that that money then and that investment is delivering value back to Canada instead of just going anywhere? And so there's this kind of whole value of the value chain of value where we could be delivering more economic activity for Canadians, and then hopefully increasing our quality of life. And that's like one small piece of the sovereignty puzzle, trying to figure out, how do we define sovereignty? Is it like, oh, all these jobs were created in Canada, or the stuff was made in Canada, or it was invented in Canada, or it's owned by Canadians? All of those are different pieces of a definition that come together to be able to call something sovereign.
And we're also seeing a lot of sovereignty washing, like already, and that sort of sucks. But just because you sort of hear the word doesn't necessarily mean that a policy or a company or a system, is sovereign. So you're right to kind of constantly ask, like, what is it we're striving for? What does that really mean? And it's kind of interesting, even writ large, that, the concept is having a moment right now, and that it hasn't been translated more effectively, or we don't have better, less cheesy phrases than elbows up. You know what I mean? Because again, that kind of inherent meaninglessness. It's like, okay, does it relate to the queen, like to the king? What is happening? Anyway, and as you know, the historical root words, the root of the word does. Anyway.
I think it's interesting because it's something that I think for a lot of people until, this year essentially has felt sort of like a distant concept. So when I was in government, it was during the first Trump administration, and I was actually working at the Ministry of Agriculture at the time, which you might think, like, what does that have to do with anything? But
Lots.
in terms of CUSMA, but also at the time, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, those were both being negotiated at the same time. And, dairy was an enormous component of a lot of these different agreements. And the debate at the time was, are we going to let American powdered dairy into our food mix? And there are questions about that, especially now with the current Trump administration, where, they're changing some of the rules and regulations around food safety. And, Canadians do have a right to know about what is in their food, and you start to lose some of that information as you expand these things. So I think it's interesting then when you think about digital sovereignty, because it's a similar thing where we don't have a lot of platforms in our own right in this country. We haven't invested in the same way as, say, the US has, or then bought up companies in the same way that some people in the US have. And, I read your newsletter every time it comes out, and you had a recent edition where he talked about Canada being, and I love this phrase, an algorithmic vassal state, because we lack oversight over how our data is used on these platforms, how it's stored on apps, and just really any control over anything that is in the control of a handful of billionaires. What's the risk for Canadians if we, in this increasingly digital world where almost everything is done in a digital process, what's the risk for us if we don't start taking back our sovereignty on some of these platforms and some of these different digital platforms?
I mean, Kaylie pointed to sort of loss of value and kind of leaving money on the table, but I think part of the risk is just also related to mis and disinformation, right? The ability to know what's real is a major threat. Social media companies and other related companies have an incredible amount of power, curatorial power over what we can access, what we can see. And we see, to pick up on your very appropriate and timely comparison to the US, not only do we see an erosion of food safety standards, we're also seeing erosions in the media landscape and sort of intentional consolidation and kind of messaging control. So that's the risk, I think, us becoming more divided, more influenced, already on search engines that have become, as Cory Doctorow would say, enshittified. We're having trouble finding information. And then the last thing I would say is there's also been a war on truth in the US that's far more explicit than it is here. But with the loss of investments in R&D research in the US, right? The fact that the historic vaccine research they were doing, gutting their institutions, that's got to be a moment that's motivating for Canada to say, no, we will invest in these institutions. We value research. We value the integrity of that, and we value truth. And I also really appreciate you bringing up just intangibles and that digital economy aspect writ large, because I think it's a lot easier for people to talk about trade in a supply management context, and it sometimes hurts the conversation because digital elements feel kind of invisible or so personalized to us that they're kind of not at the core. But these are the systems that underpin our everyday lives, for better or for worse, and we need to be able to minimize their harms, I guess I would say.
Have you guys checked out at all Gander Social? So this hasn't come out yet, of course, but it is a Canadian-based platform that is trying to sort of address this gap. Do you think there's going to be room for more platforms like that, or is this sort of a test case that we'll see how it goes first before other people take the plunge?
Hong Kong. I mean, I think we're joining the flock. I'm on a panel with Gander at Elevate. We're fans. We're supportive. I think what Gander raises is not just the national champions question, but alternatives, a more sovereign alternative. But should the state own and operate this infrastructure? Right? What do we expect? What do we hope for? What seems so lovely about them is, they're being really clear about what their values are and what they want to achieve. And like, that's what's going to bring people to them. And with any social media site, it's a scale game, right? So they're going to need people to engage and use it. But with that federated approach that's been so successful for Blue Sky and people moving away from Twitter, which by the way, Twitter's now 70-80% bot activity, unhelpful. I'm still on that platform a little bit. It's actually really bad. But I think we're in this moment where what used to seem like a dreamy or unnecessary conversation about alternatives is actually a really exciting one, where entrepreneurs and civic technologists are also able to dream more broadly and prototype and talk about alternatives. So that's what makes me excited. I think none of us could be in public policy writ large if we weren't able to maintain optimism, because you have to believe in things being better. But I'm rambling and speaking too much. Kaylie, sorry. Are you on Gander Social? Kaylie's like pretty good at being like low key, not on social media, which is like a huge accomplishment in and of itself.
I am high key not on social media.
Yeah, okay.
But it would be interesting to check out Gander and think about how perhaps they will design something different, and that's actually more enjoyable and not kind of like the time suck that can be created. And then thinking about things like making sure disinformation is curated in a different way so that we can understand what's real and what's not, and the other opportunities that kind of sit over top of this time that we're in, where there are people who have so many ideas. And if there is money around for us to be investing in those ideas, we could end up with all sorts of alternatives and creative new businesses that move us forward in a way that like reflects Canada's values instead of someone else's values.
Hear, hear.
I do want to talk about, Vass, you had mentioned, is there a role for government in this space? There's that. And then, even for folks like yourselves who have this organization that is actually just actively thinking about these things all the time. I bring up regularly on this podcast the example of Finland and their work fighting against disinformation. Of course, they share a long border with Russia, and this is, a very clear and present danger to them all the time. I did see post-election, I was watching YouTube on my TV, and this long ad came up.
Interesting. You're a YouTuber on TV. I've been reading about this.
Normally not, but actually,
like while you cook or something, or
it's part of the smart TV. Usually, it's just I used to cast it from my phone, but now I'm like, there's an app on the TV, just put it on there. Okay. But the data from our podcast even shows like it's actually primarily the people who watch on YouTube watch on their televisions, which I thought was interesting.
I've read this. Yeah,
historically, this is not something I do as a semi-old person. But there was a video of Mark Carney, and it was from some presser he had done in front of Rideau Cottage, and they had redone his audio, and it was like a really effective deep fake, and it was really, really concerning. And we are in that space now, and I'm wondering, if there is room for organizations like your own to sort of do more work on this. Is this something that the government really needs to get into? The Finland example is that it's so prevalent in their system, in their education system, that it's from K to 12 university, but seniors get specific training as well. And children who are 6 years old in that country can recognize disinformation, which is incredible. Do you think there's space for us to be doing something on that front more than they just like passively accepting what's happening to us?
Did you see both of our eyes bugged at the same time when you said 6 years old?
Yeah. It's like good, but it's bad at the same time. Yeah. How can something be so good and so very, very bad? We're thinking, look, we're thinking a little bit about this in a couple of ways. This is like very early work on something, but if it's okay to, I think there's also a conversation we're not having in the economy around sort of deep fakes or avatars as side hustles or entrepreneurs, right? So if I'm on, I would never be on, but like on OnlyFans 24/7, but it's a synthetic version of me, or I'm on a shopping channel and I'm earning money from affiliate links. How do we view that in the economy? Arguably, I'm not displacing a worker. I'm simply replicating myself. How do we look at that as economic activity? How and should we tax that? Like, is that what we want to have happen? Do people, I think people have the right to know when they're engaging with a real life human. And we don't have that even with chatbots, which is like the most common application of AI, right? I hate, one of the many bees in my bonnet is that a chatbot I think it imitates, right? Imitates a human, lets you think you're chatting with Michael, and it's like, Michael, you're just like a decision tree. Like, just have something that's labeled. So again, that's us sort of also listening and noticing and sort of smelling like what's happening and what's changing, and then be like, how do you back that into a policy context? We talk about being invaded. This is the Stephen Marsh, like, are we going to have a civil war with the US? We don't talk about that at Shield, but I just mean it's out there in the ether, and it's kind of like, well, we're already being invaded by fake, I'll say fake workers, right? A form of synthetic labor that does create economic value, but does so in a deceptive way. How do you think about that? And back to your earlier question on sovereignty, like, sovereignty as freedom, right? Freedom, the ability to do something. From a citizen or from a consumer standpoint, sovereignty is also about choice, right? And, sovereignty starts with transparency and knowability. And if you're not able to detect fake music in your Spotify feed, a fake person that you're emailing with, to schedule a fake, I don't know, right? Shopping ad influencer. What does that mean? We'd like to help people talk about that because it's happening. We're just not sort of plugging it into our frameworks. But Kaylie, how would this stuff even show up in the data?
I mean, I think if we were talking about income, like you have an account and you have a bot that's generating income for you, that would be just another business line. In that way, is that just entrepreneurship? And are we like so thrilled that someone had this idea and they're moving forward to make a little bit of money on a side hustle in order to sort of supplement their income that has
probably
declined dramatically?
Yeah.
That's where it would show up in the economic data. And then at what point is it just two bots talking to each other, and then it loses economic value because a human's attention isn't there anymore to go ahead and like buy the thing that would be sold.
And is that called, okay, I should be Googling this while we're live on air with you, Teresa, but it's too obvious if I do something else. Is that agentic internet, when like bots are talking to bots, right?
Bots, yeah.
Oh my God.
Agentic AI is what they call it. And I can see the value in some spaces. I can see the horror in others, which is something I actually want to talk about, which is young people in all this mix. So there are a lot of young people who are, taking a very digital approach to the gig economy, and they're creating all these side hustles that, altogether hopefully create an income they can live on. So there are some benefits to some of these changes that are happening, but we've seen in the data, and it is now catching up to the experience, of course, that young people are being hollowed out in this economy. I really, really worry about their future. I graduated in April 2008. The Great Recession started in September 2008. It wasn't a great time to start, and a lot of people who did start off in the economy at that time, like, you never really recover from that size of a shock.
I did then too. That's when I finished undergrad, 2008, and was Googling like how to spell purgation, which I still can't spell.
Exactly. So, but like that's an experience that millennials have had, and now Gen Z is having a similar experience where everything is happening so rapidly.
Yeah.
And the percentage of employment out there for young people is insane. It looks really, really bleak to me in terms of their long-term prospects, just with high unemployment, whether they can ever achieve a middle-class life. What do you think about, the challenges and opportunities facing young people right now in terms of this conversation of economic sovereignty?
I mean, what you've talked about just now is so brutal. And the data, like you said, is catching up. So we know that young workers who are working less hours, making less money per hour after we adjust for inflation and figure out all those things. They're also probably working more jobs. They have side hustles. They're surveilled at work. Their consumer experience is surveilled too. It's not just their job, right? So they're constantly surveilled, and also thinking about algorithmic pricing and the way that an algorithm then is trying to get as much money from them as possible means that their affordability is, first of all, impossible to measure, because we don't know the intricacies of all those algorithms and what's happening on each individual phone at any given time. On top of it, you think about the housing situation, which I mean, in some ways it's kind of cliche, but it's also omnipresent for everyone right now in the market. If you can afford a home at all, it's probably like miniature.
Guys, what was the cheapest apartment you had in Toronto? Like, when did you all first move to Toronto?
I am still stuck in it, and I will die here.
You still have it? Do you dare
Oh, yeah.
dare say what you're paying?
I don't remember what it is right now, but when I started, I think it was $975, like almost 15 years ago. And that's rent controlled. So yeah, I will die in this.
I didn't live in Toronto until I was about 35, but I lived in apartments in lots of other cities, and I can remember paying $500 a month to live alone in an apartment that was fully furnished by someone else. It's like a completely different market for young folks now.
Yeah, when I started renting this apartment, that was when they used to have those ads of like free big screen TV with rental and stuff. Like they used to have incentives for renting
and
place.
Now you watch YouTube on that TV. No, I'm just kidding. I paid $10.75 for a basement apartment in Parkdale that had its own laundry. It was a 1-bedroom, had a walk-in closet as if I needed it, and it had a bathtub and a shower, which I found very luxurious, because like one of my most strongly held like subway take type of opinions is that you should either be a bath or a shower, but it's like it feels sacrilegious to be both. Like you don't want to be in the bath and you can see the shower head, and you don't want to have to step into the bath when you're having a shower.
Exactly. Yep.
So it was like I felt fancy, but 1075, I could just make it work. Like I could just make it work and still save some money and like go out on Friday or Saturday and have a bowl of spaghetti or something and like a glass of wine with a friend. And it was like, I could get by. And I don't even want to know how much that apartment is now, to try to live alone, as you were saying too. Anyway,
yeah,
diversion, but maybe a good anchoring.
No,
yeah.
Great anchoring. One thing that I found as I'm exploring all of the data that's available is the gap between a long tenured renter and a short tenured renter has grown massively over the last 25 years. And I can't remember the number, the gap in Canada at the national level in 1996, but it was like this. And now in Canada, it's like 35%. So the gap between the amount of rent someone who's only been renting their apartment for 1 year or less versus someone who's been in the same kind of apartment like yourself for a long time is massive. So think about moving and whether or not you're actually able to afford to move. And like you're saying, you have to die in your apartment one day, a long, long time from now.
Hopefully.
Or keep it. You can pass on. This is just, I'm not even trying to demonstrate my policy knowledge. It's just like a fun fact I know is that under Ontario, we're recording in Ontario. We're all in Ontario right now. Under tenancy law, you can actually transfer your lease to someone else as long as they're able to afford it. So you can, should you choose to or need to move somewhere else, you can pass on your lease and that rent to another person. The only circumstance that the landlord can reject that transfer is if financially the person is just truly unable to pay it. I do think that's like, it's not even a loophole. It's just like a kind of a legislative form of rent control and something that, it's not about sovereignty. It's just like, it's policy, man.
But that's more than a fun fact. That's like life-saving information.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
in this economy, that's life-saving information.
We can both try to get Teresa's apartment.
The conversation about vacancy control is extremely important because I saw a stat a while ago that the average amount of months that somebody in the US stays in an apartment before they move is something like 26 months or something like that. And I think about that in terms of how, we deal with housing as voters, because if you're constantly moving, that's half of an election cycle. If I look at, how the parties have their databases and they have information on who lives where, like, it's out of date every single time. And it becomes hard to advocate for issues when that is the case. That's another aside. I did want to ask you guys
it's
about.
good though. Blow up ridings, Teresa. That can be another episode. You can have someone else on it. No, but we don't live and work in the same riding anymore. I guess with work from home, you kind of do, but it's like even that makes it so delicate in terms of where, what does it mean to have a riding and where should it be? Anyway, we'll get back on track with you.
I did want to ask you guys, I know there's like 42 episodes I'm coming up with just from this conversation, but I did want to ask about the Shield score. So, part of this conversation is, how do we evaluate economic sovereignty? What does that look like? What is something that benefits economic sovereignty? What is something that perhaps undermines it a little bit? How do you evaluate that with the score you've come up with?
Well, as type A overachievers, we thought, you know what people would like to see more of? A report card. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
We took a ton of inspiration, and Kaylie will explain most of this because it's really her thing, but we've been in dialogue about it together.
We're in it together.
We were talking, talking about sovereignty just the way you were with us, right? Like, what does it mean? Where is it? How have we looked at it through history? How do we make it real? How do we help people care so we don't lose the support and momentum for it that's, occurring in this moment? And we took a lot of inspiration from OECD best practices when it comes to something called competition assessments. This is it's something that's done when a new policy is going forward that asks, like, what does this do to and for the marketplace? Who's helped, who's harmed? And Canada's Competition Bureau has a competition assessment toolkit that sort of breaks that down further. These are informal standards, right? So we haven't actually adopted this in Canada, but taking our what we value as a think tank, what we're thinking about, what brings sovereignty and kind of value add and capture to life for us, we were able to develop this little 10-point scorecard or system that makes us reactionary, which is actually not the way we want to be. We don't ever want to seem sort of like trolly or antagonistic. We're here to be like constructive sense makers. But it lets us take a policy decision and put it in that context and say, not just binary, is this good or bad for Canada's economy, but how good is it? And reclaiming sovereignty is going to be about that relentless incrementalism of every single forward-looking decision we make. We cannot make more mistakes. So we're hoping that, it'll catch on a little bit. People will develop it with us, make it better, kind of push us, but it'll be something that we can have a conversation with. But anyway, Kaylie's the expert on it. Kaylie's putting it into practice.
We talk about sovereignty, autonomy, and we talk about economic transformation. So if we're thinking about a government decision and something like any project, any purchase that government has made, is it delivering value back to Canadians? And are we making sure that Canada has sort of governing control and decision-making power over that? So if are we making sure that it incentivizes innovation and entrepreneurship in Canada? If it's delivering that value somewhere else to another country, then it means that a business can kind of siphon the value off the top and send that GDP back somewhere else instead of keeping it in Canada. At the same time, on the economic transformation side, we think about job creation. We also think about human capital. Is it enough just to create a job, or are we going to make sure that those jobs have people who are trained to kind of do higher value jobs and things that challenge people more and actually engage them in their daily life? And then on top of that, making sure that we spread the gains broadly, and also that IP and data are owned and sort of housed in Canada instead of somewhere else. Those are some of the questions that we're asking with the score.
Yeah, very obviously, we're fun at parties, I think that's shining through.
I mean, the kind of party I would go to, I'd be talking about those kind of things,
Sick.
But maybe I'm not that cool. I did want to talk about, as you're evaluating sovereignty, the question becomes, is everyone sharing in the benefits? Like, this is an important component of any public policy that you put forward, is to make sure that, people are accessing the benefits across the board, whether it's, considerations like income, geography, language, whatever it might be. Historically, we're not always great about this. This is something that I think, as somebody who's involved in politics, we're always trying to do better on. How do we make sure, as we talk about economic sovereignty and pursue it in, all these different venues, how do we make sure it's actually benefiting Canadians across the board?
This is where talking about delivering value all across that value chain comes into play. So it's one thing to deliver a job. It's another thing to make sure that job comes with, a high pay and good benefits. On top of that, we want to make sure that we're delivering innovation, and that innovation is housed in Canada. Then hopefully we can govern the friction and minimize it while still having safe regulations and those sorts of things. And that's going to be part of the battle for sure.
And I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your newsletter, because I think it is a really, really good read. I'm a big fan of the fact that there's a little Canadian music hit at the bottom of every edition. So, for those who are reading it or are about to start reading it because they've listened to this podcast, what can you tell them about how it's structured, and how can they make a song recommendation?
Okay. How you can make a song recommendation. Thank you for inviting that. We're always looking for new music, new Canadian music. So our newsletter is called The National Interest. It's run on the platform called Cyber Impact, which is sovereign, keeps the data in Canada, is compliant with all privacy legislation, kind of double opt-in, living our values. Is it the most sophisticated format you've ever seen in your life? Absolutely not. And if you're wondering who formats the newsletter, it's me. You know what I mean? Like, all hands on deck, jack of all trades. It's like, who did this? Why is this mistake here? It's actually me. Like, the buck stops with me, but I format it. So just by replying to the newsletter, you can send us emails. And actually, we've been so touched. So we're recording this right now in September. We only have 4 kind of issues out. It's been a very gentle, soft launch, like word of mouth. We're not buying ads. We're not doing tons on social media. People have been writing back to us. People are engaging on the topics, responding, engaging, bringing up other topics they're curious about. And that's been really lovely. Those emails come right to me, actually. So if you've got, a new Canadian band, new-ish, a song you love, let us know. And we're trying to also have a little, like a playlist at the end of the year or something like that. Music lets us, highlight artist discovery outside of the algorithm. And also, it's just a fun way to celebrate Canada, because at the end of the day, I think so many of us are directionally aligned in, my gosh, let's make this country better and stronger and smarter. And it's hard work, right? It's not the intellectualness. It's just like, we are in a trade war. We are being attacked. We are being gaslit. It's really exhausting. And it's really uncomfortable and unsettling. So if we can put something out that is snack size, respects people's time, tells a little bit about what is sovereignty actually, or where does it not exist, or where can it exist, and give you, a 3-minute song to expose you to something new, we think that's actually kind of a cool win. We're proud of that.
What can, just before we wrap up here, what can people expect coming out of your organization, in the months, the years ahead? Again, you've not been up and running for all that long. So I imagine there's quite a bit coming down the pipe, but what can we look forward to from you guys?
Shield scores, charts, proposals for how we can use policy as kind of market craft, right? How to remake markets, kind of make them work more effectively, capture value. And we're also very forward looking in terms of, one way we can be sovereign as a country is by, when we look at transformative and emerging technologies, by being really smart and proactive about the regulatory pathways we carve out. So we're also kind of looking over the horizon. I sort of said to you earlier in this conversation, some of the sovereignty work is restorative and kind of backwards looking and investigative. Like, oh my gosh, how do things work? Why do they work this way? What else do we need to do? But sovereignty, again, we're trying to bring it as a practice, as a muscle going forward. So you may see proposals from us on how we can clarify and take advantage of opportunities related to, say, the ad tech stack or the future of money, because we see it as an opportunity for Canada's economy. That's some of what you'll see from us.
Kaylie, I was just wondering, are you going to start putting together some reports that are sort of repeating so that we can follow along with, how the information is changing that you're intaking?
Oh, that's a great idea, to kind of redo some of the investigations over time, like maybe every 6 months or something, to catch up. How are young people doing now? One topic that I didn't mention, or one stat that I didn't mention before, is just that new grads are facing the largest unemployment gap they have ever faced in the history of the data that we can look back to. What are we going to see 6 months from now? Hopefully we'll see that we've had some improvement, maybe not. And so some of that tracking is something that we'll be doing as well.
Awesome.
Teresa, is there a report you want us to do? Do you have an idea for us? Like, honestly, I ask, not to tease you or put you on the spot, but again, we're always listening, right? Like, hey, what's an interesting format? What's an interesting data set? What else and what now? Because I think a lot of people think, okay, think tanks are slow, or what are they working on? Is Vass going to come out with this like huge aggressive blast of like tons of reports? And, to a certain extent, we will be doing that. But I mean, we're able to kind of change up our work week, change up the day, jump on something because it's most relevant. So I'm curious what you'd be interested in.
Well, I was going to say, I would say that from what I've followed so far, you guys are really hip and cool. And often think tanks are sort of seen as like, a stodgy little thing in the corner, which is a bit dusty sometimes, but that is not your vibe at all.
No,
so I think
no dust.
I think there would be very interesting work coming out of your organization, because you do seem to move with the times and find things interesting as they happen, which I think is a benefit to the public, because we don't have a lot of that out there. So,
Teresa, I'll be sending this to all of my board members immediately upon release. That's so kind of you to say. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for the opportunity to kind of share some of our notes and kind of look under the hood as we lurch forward.
Well, thank you both for joining me. This is a great conversation. It's, I always say one of my favorites. No, I don't normally say that. This is one of my favorites. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian communications company specializing in content creation, narrative development, and strategic communications. Our music was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.